should be live. Welcome everyone. I'll give it a couple of minutes to check that you are indeed here. We are live from Chiswick in London. If any of you are watching this on replay in the next few days, if you're not watching the live, if you wanted to skip the hellos and go straight into the walking tour, you could skip the next 10 minutes. We'll give it 10 minutes to wait for everyone to connect. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me properly. We've got about 10 minutes to go. And Tish is here. Welcome, Tish. Nice to have you along. And thank you for the sound on visual check. So we've got about 10 minutes to go. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. Welcome, Ronnie. Welcome, Pauline. And welcome everyone else that I did not greet. If any of you were completely new to me, you're very welcome. And again, if any of you were watching the replay in the next few days, you can skip the next 9 minutes. If you want to skip the hellos, we'll just wait for 10 minutes for everyone to connect. Nice calm day, yes, and beautiful day here in London so far. So we're lucky. Let me flip this camera around so you get a nice view. So we are in Chiswick Old Cemetery. There's a lot of action in the tree behind me. It's only a little squirrel. Saw him earlier, but it looks like a ghost because it keeps moving the branches. Look, it's moving everywhere. Well, as soon as I point the camera, it's not moving anymore. But you got all those little acorns falling down. I think it's the squirrel shaking the branches and then it's coming down the floor to get the acorn. Alice, nice to have you along. Nice to see you live. Welcome back. You like a cemetery with a lot of action? Cool. My phone is telling me that I've got some other apps draining the battery, but too late. I don't think I can do anything about other apps now because I don't want to distract this app. Let me see. Maybe I could. Let's see. Optimize now. Yeah, perfect. Nothing happened. Ew. Good. So we've got about 7 minutes to go. If any of you were completely new to me, watching the replay in the next few days, weeks, or even more, if you wonder how to join those lives, if you only end up watching the replays, what you want to do, because they're quite easy to miss those live, so you want to subscribe to the channel and hit the little notify me bell for everything. This way you get a notification when I go live, because they're quite easy to miss otherwise. And welcome, Tariq. Nice to have you along. So we've got about 6 minutes to go now. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. I can hear the squirrel again, but I don't know where he is. I got some food in my bag. I could give it to him, but I don't think he needs any. There's a lot of little type of acorn in that tree. I'm sure they are edible. Well, not sorry, not by me, but I'm pretty sure the squirrel likes those. I'll show you. It's some kind of I guess it's an acorn, no, but that looks like squirrel food to me. Not that I often try squirrel food, but this looks edible. Okay, let's see who I've missed. Welcome everyone that just joined. Oh, the proms are finished, so you can join more lives. Perfect. So nice to have you available again. Nicely squirrel sized. Yeah. Well, Tish, they don't care about the size. I've got some squirrels at home, and we've got this kind of like a bicycle cage to put our bicycle. And the squirrels, they hide their foods for later. That's why they are such a symbol of banking. And they keep hiding their food in my bicycle basket, in my helmet. So often when I grab my helmet in the morning, I've got a lot of half biscuits or whatever it might be. And the other day I found a half coconut. Well, a half of a half, so a quarter of a coconut. So I literally dumped on my head. I don't even know how such a tiny squirrel can carry a quarter of a coconut, but clearly they can, because they are the only animals that can go through the bicycle cage. So yeah, size doesn't matter for the squirrels. Let me see, 4 minutes to go. And it is nearly 6:15 p.m. UK time. So we should have a bit of a sunset on the river. Oh, I'd love to have a squirrel on my shoulder, like coming with me everywhere. Although I think they are a bit hyperactive as a pet. I follow a few people that have pet squirrels on Instagram and stuff, but they are a bit hyper at home. Not sure it's the best pet. So we've got 3 minutes to go. Yep. Thanks, Bonnie. I think you just bought me a coffee. I saw a notification in my email, so thank you very much. It's always greatly appreciated. And thanks in advance to anyone else that will tip somehow today, whether it's on YouTube, you can do that on YouTube as well, or buy me a coffee or PayPal me. It's always greatly appreciated. Every little helps. You woke up with a squirrel on your chest? Where was that? Where was that, Pisas? Hope that was not in your bed. I have woken up because of squirrels before, but not because they were on my chest, because they were in my attic, just above my bed. So when they run after one another, sometimes it makes a lot of noise, but they were never on my chest. And welcome, Linda. I didn't see you yet. And Diane is here. Nice to see you, Diane. Perfect, Linda. So we've got 2 minutes to go. Let me show you where I am. In case you get bored of my face, you can get a bit of the view. Just so you know, I might as well say it now. The very first maybe 5-10 minutes, not even the first 5 minutes of the tour, I'm going to try to keep my voice fairly low, because some of you might remember there's a lady that lives right there in her 12 millions villa. She doesn't like the sound of my voice. That's probably why she bought a home overlooking a graveyard, because dead people are not very noisy usually. But yeah, every time I come, she complains about the noise, or she bangs the door, or she shouts at me. So I'm gonna try to be fairly quiet when I'm close to that property. And it should be nearly time. 1 minute to go. Let me gracefully stand up. Where is my squirrel friend? Do you want to come and say hello before I make a move? I can't see what branch is. Oh yeah, he's hold on. No, I don't see him. I see what branch he's on, but I don't see him. Yeah, Pisas, you need to explain the chest. Okay, let me check. And it is officially time to start. So welcome everyone. It is 6:15 p.m. UK time. Nice to have you along. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. You've got the chat. Feel free to use it as much as you'd like. You know, if I don't have time to read your comments, that's absolutely fine. It's actually better if you keep the chat active, because when people stop talking, sometimes I might think, oh, I've lost you or something. I might have lost the signal. So don't be shy in the chat. Express yourself. And welcome, Kurt. Right, let me flip this camera around and let's go. So we are in Chiswick Old Cemetery. We'll actually leave the cemetery and actually we'll go towards a graveyard, because you have a cemetery right next to a graveyard. Let me show you. So this part here, it's the cemetery, and there's a church there. So that's St. Nicholas Church. There's a little railing in between down there. So once you move, because it's not exactly the same. We mentioned that in some of my tours before. A graveyard is a little burial ground, and the cemeteries, they were commercial enterprises, usually a little bit later in date, and they usually have their own chapels for burials, but that's not a place of regular Sunday worship. So this is the beautiful St. Nicholas Church, but first let's go down the street to show you a couple of former pubs. And remember, I'm going to be fairly quiet in the first street, and then I can get back to the normal sound of my voice. Right. Welcome to beautiful Chiswick. This building here, it's from the 15th century. That's the old Burlington. It used to be a pub. Allegedly, that's where the famous highwayman Dick Turpin had his marriage or wedding breakfast, which I find quite funny, because when I did the research for that tour, I didn't know what a wedding breakfast was. I was like, really? Do they have a ceremony the morning after, you know, after their first night of love? But no, it's basically just a wedding reception. And this little pink building here also used to be a pub. It was called the Lamb. They worked with the brewery. So this is the Fuller's Brewery. So the tower in the background, it's part of a huge brewery that's still running here in Chiswick. And this little pub, it closed, I think it was 1909, so it closed a while ago. But it is in that little pub that they had an inquest into the death of a gentleman called John Montagu Druitt. We'll talk about him in a little while, but I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He was, of course, a Jack the Ripper suspect. Not my favorite one, until I got a chance to look into him a little bit deeper and do a bit more research for that tour. And actually, you know, why not? Why not? There are some very suspicious point in his life. But I'll tell you a bit more about him in a moment. For now, let's look at the graveyard here. So St. Nicholas, of course, you might have heard of him, because he was the gentleman that inspired Santa Claus, you know. He was the saint patron of, I think, sailors, children, and prostitutes. And there's been a church here on this site for over 1,000 years. I think it was the first one was in the 7th century. But this very building is mainly Victorian. The clock tower is still from the 15th century, but they did a lot of refurbishment and a lot of work in Victorian times. So what we see today is actually very Victorian. And when they did the refurbishment in Victorian times, they realized that there was a little crypt underneath. They didn't even know it was there. And they found a lot of coffins in the crypt. And one of them was very weirdly shaped. It was like a tiny little coffin, but not like a child. It looked like it was missing a head. And of course, well, you might know that we have a body that's very famously missing a head, Oliver Cromwell's body. 2 of his daughters are buried here. So that led to some speculations that it might have been the body of Oliver Cromwell buried in the crypt. It is possible. Some of you might know Oliver Cromwell was first buried in Westminster Abbey, like a king. And when Charles II came back to the throne, he was disgusted that Cromwell had been buried in the Abbey, so he had him exhumed and hanged, drawn and quartered. So the guy was already dead, but he was executed anyway. And there's a lot of debate about what happened to his body, because they chopped his head off, they put his head on a spike, and I might have told you in Holborn about the 300 years story of his head that is now finally buried in Sydney Sussex College. But the body, we don't know. So his body might have been buried here. We don't know. Anyway, let me show you this beautiful monument here. So this is an example of what we call memento mori. When you see a skull on a headstone, it's not because it's a pirate or a witch or whatever. It's what we call memento mori. That's what they did to remind you of your own mortality, to remind you that your life could be gone in a split of a second. And before the Reformation, that was also to remind you that you'd go to the purgatory, you'll be judged. And, you know, at the time, well, still today, anyone can die from 1 minute to the next. But at the time, you know, their knowledge of medicine was so bad that really some diseases could kill you or all your family in the space of a few days, you know. So that was a reminder of that. Anyway, let's go and see potentially the most famous person buried here. There are a few more people buried here, but I don't know much about them. Like the guy that invented the telegram, well, Oliver Cromwell's daughters, Charles II mistress. We'll talk about her in a moment as well. But the most famous is this one. So this is William Hogarth, the famous painter. Well, painter. He was indeed a painter. He had his summer house here. We are only 6 miles from his winter house, because we are only 6 miles from the Charing Cross. It's quite funny for us today to have a summer house that close from central London. But yeah, so he had his summer house here. And Hogarth really was known, well, he was a great painter, but really he was known because he was a chronicler of his times. He was very good at a good satire of society, really, in the London in which he lived in the 18th century. And he published, well, we might have spoken about Gin Lane and Beer Alley in some of my tours before. And at the time, people also very much started to have an interest into prostitution. and how did those ladies end up on that trade, you know? And he published a series of 6 engravings called The Harlot's Progress. I think I've got them in there, let me show you. And he would only publish about 1,000 for his subscribers. But they were very quickly copied. So they'll do literally a copy and they'll print some more. And he was being very much infuriated by those copies, and he complained to Parliament. So he was a precursor in terms of copyright complaints. So they actually called it well, everyone called it the Hogarth Act, although it was a copyright act. I think it's 1735. And look, little detail I've just noticed. See the little yellow thing there? That's also a defibrillator. So it seems to be the new fashion to have defibrillators by graveyards. Well, I suppose it's more for the church than anything else, but I don't know, maybe there's a lot of heart attacks at church. Now, while we're here, let me show you. Some of you might remember the very first time I did this tour. It would have been nearly 3 years ago now. You can see the sign from here, the Lamb Brewery. It's part of the Fuller's one. Yes, some of you might remember the first time I did this tour, I was completely flooded. I was walking into water up to my knee. Well, look, it's not that unusual. According to the little plaque, it does happen. Now, let me show you the river. So in December, late December 1888, there's a body that was found floating on the river about this spot here. It was indeed John Montague Druitt. Druitt was a young man, a young lawyer that took his own life. We don't really know why. We don't know what was wrong in his life. We do know that he had just been fired for a school in Blackheath in which he was working as a teacher. We don't know why he was fired. He had been given some money, though. He had been just paid for the semester. He had checks in his pockets when they found the body. Some have speculated that it could have been because he had some type of an affair with students. So that was a teenage boy school. But really, there's absolutely anything that points towards this type of speculation. So it is possible indeed, but we really don't know. We really don't know that for a fact. He is. Let me show you his photo. I think I've got his photo. So this is John Montague Druitt. He's from a wealthy family from Dorset. He went to Winchester College. He actually, before to go to, right after being a student at Oxford, he did study a little bit of medicine. There were quite a few doctors in his family. His uncle, John Druitt, was a very famous surgeon. When I say very famous, I mean very famous, because he was. John Druitt believed that alcohol, especially wines, good wines, could be good for your health. So he was used a lot as a marketing doctor, you know, in the newspapers. All the alcohol brands, especially wines, would use Dr. Druitt. So the name was fairly famous at the time. I'm telling you that because, well, I'm not saying it happened. Some ripologists claim it might have happened, but you know, let's say if he was arrested, maybe in a very compromising situation, maybe late at night with a bit of blood on himself, or whatever it might be, you know, by just saying his name, Montague Druitt, he could have been let off. He was such a gentleman, you know. He was not the type of people that would commit such atrocities. So, you know, not saying this happened, but it could have. And so he took his own life. That is a fact. He had a train ticket in his pocket from Charing Cross to Hammersmith. So he probably jumped off the Hammersmith bridge a few weeks earlier. So he probably took his own life from any time between the 1st and 4th of December, which is exactly, nearly a month after the last known Ripper murder, the canonical fives, Mary Jane Kelly. And little pause in the story. This home here, it's probably worth 20 millions. It was in the news at some point, not that long ago, I think 2005, when they did the first season of The Apprentice. I've never watched it, the UK version, because I know there's a US version as well. Apparently they rent it, and some of the contestants, they managed to, so they were filming inside, they managed to do 12,000 pounds of damage. They had a barbecue indoors, and so yeah, 12,000 pounds. A lot of those buildings are very, very expensive. Some of them sell between 10 millions and 20 millions. It's madness. For a building that is built on flooding ground, you know, I find it astonishing, really. Because they've got their gardens on the other side here, so you've got to cross over the street to go to the garden. Well, it's amazing to have a garden right on the river, but yeah. And anyway, so back to Druitt. So his uncle, the famous surgeon, he was blaming prostitutes for everything, you know, all the sexually transmitted diseases. Of course, it's always the lady's fault, you know, never the customer's fault. And he actually published a book called The Surgeon Bible, where he blamed all those ladies. And so although Montagu was not a doctor, he was a lawyer, he probably would have had some basis in medicine anyway. And of course, his family was known because of his doctor uncle. And anyway, pretty much everything we know really about Montagu, it's a lot of hearsay. But there's the chief suspect, and one of them that they believed to be guilty was a man from high society or the upper classes, that was a very respectable man, that was a surgeon, and he had drowned himself, he had taken his own life after the fifth murder. Now, that sounds very much like Druitt. Although he was not a surgeon, he was a lawyer. But some say that people have purposely confused people because they did not want to shame the Druitt family. According to some ripologists, it is possible that, well, he had a cousin, Charles Druitt, that was a Church of England priest. So it is possible that that cousin would have had his confession, but of course, you know, he's not allowed to tell it. His job is a priest. But some say that Charles would have had that on his conscience, and he did not want anyone else to be hanged for the crime because he knew that Montagu had done it. Many people from his family seemed to suspect him. So, you know, it is possible. And there's actually an MP from West Dorset, where the family was from, that claimed in the press that everyone knew who the Ripper was. It was this surgeon that had taken his own life in the river. And there's even a ripologist, a chap from Australia, that published a book. He's convinced that at the beginning of the 20th century, the case was almost closed, that everyone knew in Edwardian time, everyone knew that it was that guy that did it. And that after the Second World War, somehow we kind of forgot, and people start searching for the Ripper again. So some claim that even Melvin McNaughton knew, but they were kind of hiding the case because they didn't want to shame the full family, and because he was dead anyway, so there was no one to catch. You know, maybe. Anyway, the tide is going down, so the river Thames is tidal. You know, the level goes in and out following the sea levels, At the moment it's going down, so in maybe an hour we'll be able to cross to go on the 8. The little island, it's called an 8. It spells Ayot, but it's pronounced 8. And you see there's a pillar down there, so when the pillar is getting wet, if you're on the island, you know, you really got to cross over back, otherwise you might be stranded on the 8. It's a little nature reserve today. So one more thing about Druitt that, well, personally I find a bit far-fetched, but you know, who knows, anything is possible. There's one ripologist that is really convinced about Druitt that believe that he might have been a socialist, a really far-left activist. And so as opposed to his uncle, you know, that blamed prostitutes, that he actually wanted to help them. I nearly fell down here, I nearly slipped in the mud. But you know, in a way it would make sense. So there's a bit of evidence that he had indeed given some money to a charity in the East End. So he was aware for sure of the poverty problem there, and he had given money. So you know, and some say it's a bit far-fetched, but you know, those ladies, their lives were already ruined by poverty, by being on the streets, having to sell their bodies for most of them at least. So sacrificing those ladies to highlight the extreme poverty of the East End, I mean, if that was the point, that was very, very successful. Because, you know, you could go and kill sex workers anywhere across London or the country. Why would you go back over and over again to Whitechapel? Well, that was full of police officers at the time, plus the vigilante committee and all those people. So why would you go back to that area full of police when you could just go to any slums or even any posh areas? You know, sadly, sex workers are fairly easy targets, you know, because of the nature of the job, because you have to go into a very intimate place. So, you know, maybe, I mean, it would make sense. I think it's a bit far-fetched if you ask me, but it is possible. Everything is possible, really, with the Ripper story. That same ripologist also claims, I don't think there's any evidence of that, but he claims that Druitt had been sent by his family to an asylum in France, and that he had confessed to the murders. And unfortunately for him, the nurse spoke English, and she understood, and she actually kicked him out of the asylum. Again, I don't know what his sources are for that. I'm not sure there's any type of evidence of that, but you know, it would make sense. And he could, so whenever he came to Hammersmith, it could have been to check himself in an asylum. There was the Manor House Asylum here that was a place for, well, posh lunatics, they would have said at the time. It was quite an expensive asylum that was run by some family friends of the Druitt family. So he could have been on his way here to check himself in an asylum. He had a note in his pocket that stated, "I was afraid to finish like mother." His mother had some mental health issues as well. She actually died in the same asylum, not at the same time. She was not here when he came. And maybe he panicked because at the time the police were closing in on the asylums because they were convinced that Jack the Ripper might be in one of them. So, you know, who knows? He's a good suspect. The arguments against him is that he doesn't really have much connections to Whitechapel. Most ripologists would tell you that the Ripper was very, you know, that he knew the streets like the back of his hands. Druitt lived in Blackheath, he worked in Bank. He could have visited, but he was not living there, you know. Anyway, this is Walpole House. It's named after the nephew of Robert Walpole, our first Prime Minister. I think that's the one that sold for 18 million, so not that long ago. This was the site, different building, but that's where Barbara Villiers used to live. She was one of the many mistresses of of Charles II. Villiers, you might have heard that name before in some of my tours. Same family as the Duke of Buckingham, the first Duke of Buckingham, the lover of James I. He was also a Villiers. Anyway, let me show you a very interesting letterbox. Can you see what's wrong with that post box? There's something very wrong here. What's wrong? It's not normal, is it? There's something very wrong with that post box. Let me know in the chat what's wrong. It is missing the royal cipher indeed. So you might know, if you followed my tours before, we always check the little cipher. So that's the initials of the monarch, which should be here. Sometimes it's on the other side. My guess, what might have happened here is that they might have had some damage, maybe a car running into it or whatever. So they might have replaced the door. So if the old cipher was on this side and they took a door from a different model, I don't think there's any foundries in the UK that still produce them now. The new ones, they're probably made in China. I don't know for a fact, but probably. So yeah, they probably had a door replacement. It happens. You know what? I should go. There's one in London that has 2 different ciphers. I should go and film it for a little YouTube short. I think that's what happened as well. They had a door replacement and they already had a cipher on the door. So they have 2 different ciphers. I think it's Victoria and Edward VII. I'll go and do a little video there. I'll show you. Anyway, beautiful building again. And let me show you up here. I'll zoom in. Some of you might recognize those little signs. We've seen those before. See those 2 little plaques, metal plaques in the bricks. I'll show you an example if you don't see very well from here. This is a fire insurance plaque. So at the time, you know, after the Great Fire of London of 1666, people were very scared, of course, of fires. We didn't have the fire brigade yet, so they started those insurance plaques that basically the insurance is themselves. When you had a fire, it was the insurance that would come. And then it's basically the watermen that would help them extinguish the fires. So you know those guys, those taxi boats, those ferrymen, they'll be onboarded to help. There were the firemen, they'll be paid, but you had a lot of members of the public that would come and help as well. They used to be paid with beer token. So to get them to help, they were like, oh, it looks like that person loves gin and tonic. There's quite a few bottles of, is that tonic water? I think it is, yeah. They must have had a very posh party in there. They did not invite me. Anyway, what were we saying? So they'll, those members of the public would be asked to come and help with the fire, and they'll give them a beer token. So they'll be paid at the pub after the incident. But when the brigade came, the insurance company came, if you didn't have the little plaque, they wouldn't do anything. They'll watch it burn, unless maybe to go next door. But yeah, so that's why they had a need for proper fire brigade. After the Great Fire of Southwark, that's when they created the public fire brigade. But before that, you had to have those little plaques. So usually when you see those plaques, it's building from the 1700s. Now, I'm gonna try not to say anything massively interesting for the next 5 minutes, because sometimes I have a little dip in the signal in the next 200 meters. So not gonna say anything too interesting this way. If that happens, you know, you won't miss anything of great interest. Not that I ever say anything of great interest. it's very, it feels a bit like a village here in Chiswick. It's very much part of London today, to give you an idea in terms of transport. They used to have a big cheese fair in Chiswick. That's how they got the name Chiswick. They don't do it anymore. It's stopped. There's also a little cafe and shop here that has an amazing. I've lost you for a sec. Oh, we should be back. I'm just gonna stop saying anything interesting. Look at that. Just a super cute display here. So it belongs to the cafe, of course, but it's just very nice. So that's a lovely little cafe with they sell their own pastries and sandwiches as well here. It's just lovely. I just love those Cinco Ciento. I love those cars. I wanted to buy one when I was 18, but I had a Mini instead, an old Mini. Anyway, let me turn around to show you a wonderful stink pipe. The stink pipes, we might have spoken about them in some of my tours. They are sewer gas pipes. So the gases, the sewers, the fermentation or the putrefaction of human poo that creates a bit of methane, the gas that could create explosions. So they had to have those pipes for the gases to go out. But of course, those gas, they stink. So they had those huge stink pipes, so it would go above everybody's head. So you wouldn't smell those sewer smells. Have I lost you again? Not sure what this emoji means. I hope I didn't lose you again. Anyway, if that happened, it should be much better from now. That it's one particular spot here when I know sometimes the signal goes a little bit funny. And let's go and see another letterbox here. That one does have a cipher. I think this one is going to be Edward VII, if I remember right, but let's double check. We're here, perfect, good. So, there we go. Yeah, Edward VII. So you see an E and an R. So the R is for Rex. Edward VII's Rex. So that's that one is not very straight. We've got one in Hammersmith, not far from here, that is completely embraced by a tree. I'll show you. I've just filmed a little short earlier. I'll show you. Anyway, this is a beautiful Georgian terrace. I think it's 17 homes, if I remember right. And at the time, in Georgian times, you wouldn't have had much around it, And those Georgian buildings, let me cross over. Well, often you have a little window above the door. It's not always the case, but that's often a sign of being Georgian. Those are little coal covers. You might remember you had at the time those coal deliveries, and they did not want to get all the home dirty, so they had the coal delivered into the cellars through those little things. And those little boot scrappers, so if you came down from your horse into the dirty mud, sign of Georgian era. You don't think Edward was totally straight? Right. There's a few famous people that lived in here. Sir Alan Herbert. He was, on top of being an author, he was, I think he was in Parliament. He helped with the newly developed the divorce laws, really. Oh, and he also helped popularizing the game of Skittles. If you don't know what Skittles is, let me show you. It's a pub game that they played a lot at the pub, the Black Lion. Don't ask me how to play it. I have no idea. That's way too British for me. So that's the game of Skittles. Apparently Herbert was a big player. Oops, sorry. I'm just going to try to remove it. There we go. And we have a couple more famous people that lived here. So this is Sir Emery Walker. That's a little museum. I've not been inside. I think it's only opened on certain days. But here it's very nice. It's got some wallpaper from William Morris and everything on the walls. He was a typographer. There's a little story. Apparently, he had a typing machine, a typographer with a special font that he did not want people to find, and apparently he dumped it in the river. That font was only found 100 years later, apparently. And there's the last one that should be just there after the yellow one. Another blue plaque. Oh, you've been on a tour. I should do that. So this is Edward Johnston. He was a calligrapher. He's mainly known for the font of the London Underground. They don't use it anymore today, but let me show you. So this is, the W is quite specific, so that's his font. The London Underground has changed it now. It's no longer the same. But oh, candlelit. Oh, that's cool. I should try. I always forget. Every time I come here, I'm like, oh, I should try, and then I forget. Anyway, this beautiful pub, the Black Lion, was the scene of a horrible crime, if you want to call it a crime. What happened is that in 1803, Hammersmith, we are now in Hammersmith, we've just passed over the border really between Chiswick and Hammersmith. In 1803, there was a ghost in Hammersmith. Many witnessed the ghost. There was a guy that was driving a coach with a lot of people in the coach. He stopped here one night because he saw a ghost. He ran into the pub and everything. So there were quite a few witnesses. There's also allegedly a lady that was pregnant at the time that saw the ghost, fainted, and lost her life. I don't think that lady really existed because a bit later on there was a trial and there were no evidence of that lady, so she probably never existed. But it didn't matter. People believed it at the time. They believed in that ghost. And everyone in Hammersmith were getting scared. Ladies wouldn't go out after dusk, and everyone was petrified. There were very many witnesses that saw that ghost. I mean, usually it's one or two, but we're talking about at least a dozen, even more. Some of the sightings were not very convincing. Some people claim that the ghost had some kind of feet, and that he looked like he had some kind of a tablecloth over his head. So some claim that it might have been a human dressed as a ghost, but there was definitely something happening in Hammersmith. And we are at the very beginning of the 19th century. We did not have the Metropolitan Police yet. That was created in 1829. So at the time you had only those night watch, and those people kind of volunteering themselves to look for the ghost. And that's exactly what happened with one guy that decided to go and look for the ghost. His name was Francis Smith. One night he goes out on the street. He's like, I'm gonna catch that ghost. He needed a bit of Dutch courage, so he had a couple of pints, if not more, and he grabbed his gun and he was looking for the ghost. Da-da-na-na, da-na-na-na. Ghostbusters. So he's there drunk on the streets. When the ghost arrived, there was a white figure right in front of him. So he dared him. He pointed his gun towards him and he was like, who are you? What are you? I'll shoot you. The ghost did not reply. So he shot him in the jaw. The ghost fell down And as he looked a bit closer to the body, he realized it was not a ghost. Sadly, it was a human. The body was taken into the pub, the Black Lion, where he lost his life. So Francis Smith was now going to go into trial for murder. Some might call it manslaughter, but no, it's not an accident. He shot him. Manslaughter or ghost slaughter. And that was, I mean, I honestly wouldn't have wanted to be a jury on that one, because the jury was told, you cannot go for manslaughter. It's murder, it's guilty or not guilty. So he was guilty on mistaken beliefs. And the jury had to go for guilty, because he was indeed guilty. And so he was, at the time, guilty of murder, you should hang. Eventually, though, he asked for a pardon with the king. So 1803, George III. And George III agreed. So he was given a pardon. So he was sent to one year of hard labor. But the question of mistaken belief at court was not actually dealt with until the 80s. Something happened in the 80s. I think it was in the Midlands or somewhere north of London. I think if I remember right, it was a guy that was grabbing or attacking a guy on the street, and someone ran to them. They beat him up and he died. And it turned up that it was not an attacker, it was a shopkeeper. The other guy was a shoplifter. So it's basically the shopkeeper that ran out to grab a shoplifter. So it looked like an attack, but it wasn't an attack. So now the person that had attacked him or tried to help the other one, he was now down for manslaughter. And that's how they had to legalize the question of acting on mistaken beliefs. This is a beautiful pub, the Old Ship. There's quite a few old and amazing pubs here with a river view. I think this one is from the beginning of the 1700s, so quite an old one as well. So, we have, I call this tour human remains because we have some more bodies that have been found here. In the 60s, this is the site where somebody washed out or were deposited the victims of the Hammersmith nude murderer, Jack the Stripper. If you read the description, some of you might have imagined it was a typo. No, Jack the Stripper really existed. Let me turn around so you get a nice view of the sunset. The lighting is beautiful at this time. It's getting a bit grey though, I hope it's not gonna rain. So yeah, Jack the Stripper, it's a very sad series of murders that happened in the 60s. 1964 to be precise, with the first bodies. The first one was Anna Telford. She was found towards the bridge there. And the second one, Irene Lockwood, she was found towards the spot where Druitt was found. Both of them were sex workers. Both of them were pregnant, and they had contracted sexually transmitted diseases. Yeah, we'll go down there in a moment, Kurt. One sec. You're ahead of me. And so yeah, those two ladies. Well, it started to look like a series already, but that moment they were not quite sure. Eventually, though, a lot more bodies were found. You had Mary Fleming, Margaret McGowan, Bridget O'Hara. There were two more that might have been associated with the same killer, but we don't know for sure. So the two bodies were in the water, but after that they were on the streets, those ladies. And if you're wondering what that little structure is straight ahead, that's because we're close to the rowing club and the sailing club. So when they have rowing competitions, I don't know if you can call it a referee, but the organizers, that's where they stand to have a nice view and start and finish the race and all that. So if you've watched the Olympics with the rowing, all that, some of the winners probably were trained here at the rowing school here. So back to those poor victims. So all of them were sex workers. It's probably just convenience. Sadly, they're quite easy target, those ladies. And sadly, when you read the press articles from the 60s, you realize that we've not evolved very much since the Jack the Ripper story. The compassion, even in the 60s, those murders with prostitutes, they were almost considered almost like industrial accidents. You work in a factory, you might have an accident. Well, you work as a sex worker, you might be murdered. The police, though, they how do you enter it, Tish? I don't know. I guess they have a ladder, but yeah, there's no stairs. The police, though, they did an incredible job. Although the killer was never found, it's still an unsolved murder. They did everything they could do at the time. They had hundreds of officers on the case. There was a guy called De Rose, the chief investigator. He had a great reputation. He had been the one that guessed the guiltiness of the acid bath murderer for 4 years, I think, before anybody else. So he was a great police officer, but he just couldn't solve it. He had a favorite suspect. He claimed it could be a guy called Mungo Island. They've since proven that Mungo was actually in Scotland for one of the murders, at least. So this is the school. And the killer was never found. The police officers, they had ladies officers dressed up as sex workers on the street. They had male officers watching them. They were noting all the number plates of many vehicles here at night. And, they didn't have computers at the time, so every number plate would be written down, on paper. So they did a lot of work, but that just didn't develop. They had a big clue, though, from the third victim, so from Helen Bartholomew. The bodies were all naked. That's what led to the nickname Jack the Stripper. Some of them had their teeth, or some of their teeth, or dentures removed. But after the third one, their bodies often had little stains of paint, like industrial paint, like from a high pressure painting spray. And that was very unusual. So they imagined that because the bodies had been stored before to be disposed of. So the police thought they might have been stored in an industrial building. Eventually they found the very space where they would have been stored, but hundreds of gentlemen worked there. They even suspected a police officer because the bodies were found in different police jurisdictions. There's even a guy that confessed, but it was all rubbish. Eventually the case was never solved. There's a good suspect. I'll tell you about him in a moment. Let me turn around to show you the site of the school here. That's where the poor wife of Charles II used to live. She was Catherine de Braganza, the Portuguese lady. She was sadly not able to conceive a child, so you might know, or at least it didn't work. She had a couple of miscarriages. So that's why Charles II was here at the Dove to meet Nell Gwyn. That's why he was very conveniently going to Barbara Villiers' place down the road, because Catherine lived here. Poor Catherine, though, when she married him, he had already had an illegitimate child with Villiers. You might know, we think he probably has had 18 illegitimate children. It's hard to prove, really, but yeah. And poor Catherine. She was actually forced to meet Villiers. Apparently, she very much cried that night. But the king probably kind of loved her anyway, because he could have tried to divorce her on the ground of infertility. You could do that. He refused to do so. And she survived him. She was actually a widow for 20 years, but after that she went back to Portugal eventually. And so yeah, quite an interesting lady in her own right. She's the one that popularized the tea in the UK. You know, she brought that habit from Portugal. So that's allegedly after her that people started to drink a lot of tea around here. Anyway, here is the Dove. So that's the pub that Kurt mentioned in the chat. It's from the 17th century. Well, it was not built as a pub. It was a coffee house originally. And yes, allegedly Charles II had some dates in here with Nell Gwyn, the famous witty Nell, the actress, one of his other mistresses. Lovely pub. I've never been actually, but I prefer to spend my money in businesses that take cash, because they are cashless. And I think, you know, we don't want to become a cashless society like Sweden. So I prefer to support the businesses that take cash. I know I'm such a rebel. So yeah, a lot of the pubs and restaurants in London are becoming cashless, which is a shame, because if they have an electricity cut, well, you can't pay anymore. And there's Ernest Hemingway drunk there. Oh, I didn't know that. There's apparently the poet that wrote the lyrics of Rule Britannia as well. Allegedly wrote them from in there. Now this little park here is actually it used to be built on. This was bombed through the Second World War, and eventually they didn't rebuild on it. They made it an open space. We used to have a river here going into the Thames. That's the Stamford Brook. You know, we've talked about those lost rivers in some of my tours before. And cash is king, yes. And it used to, well, it still does. It's been covered. Let's see, because the tide is low. Let's see if we see where it goes. Oh yeah, look, it's right here. So this is the Stamford Brook going. So this is the little lost river going into the Thames. See those houseboats? That's quite cool. Some people live on their boats here. That's probably much bigger than any of those canal boats, you know, that you might have in Camden or in Hertfordshire, where we were last week. And yeah, William Morris had a home right next to the pub as well. Anyway, in the distance, that's the Hammersmith Bridge. It's the lower bridge in terms of, it's the lower bridge in London, and it was built by Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette, you've probably heard of him. We talked about him when we talked about the sewage system in London. He's the one that created the first London sewer. Sir Richard Burton, he might have come here as well for drinks this year, because he used to live on the other side of the river. So yeah, he probably would have visited as well. Yeah. Anyway, let's go into Hammersmith. Hammersmith, by the way, it's a Saxon name, but apparently it is probably because they produced hammers in Saxon times. Let me show you the view from here. Hold on, before we go with the light. It's beautiful. Let me slowly pan around. Look at that. With the lights on. Cool. So let's go into Hammersmith. So yeah, I was talking about the Jack the Stripper. We do have a very good suspect. His name is Harold Jones. He was not suspected at the time by the Rose, But there had been some criminologists working on the case ever since. And there's a recent documentary called Dark Sun by the criminologist David Wilson. You might know him, he's always on the BBC in many documentaries. He builds quite a convincing case on Harold. Harold was a killer, he was a psychopath. He was a crazy case. At the age of 15 years old, in Abertillery in Wales, he had killed 2 little girls. The first one, he was actually arrested for the murder and then acquitted because no one believed he could have done it. And there's a little girl actually that accused him still. He eliminated her as well. So horrible case. And then eventually he was arrested again. Then he confessed because he was gonna turn 16. So for him it was much better to be tried before the age of 16 because otherwise he could have hanged. So he was sent to prison for 20 years. In prison he said he had no intention to change his desire of killing. So quite a horrible case. And after, was he a posh lunatic? No, I don't think he was very posh-ish. And after prison, sadly, he was released to join the war effort, the Second World War. And he was given, after the war, he was given a new name and he started a new life. Now, I'm going to stop with the story because I'm going to go under the Hammersmith flyover. See the busy road? It's the Hammersmith flyover. I think the signal should be okay. I've tried earlier, but just to make sure, I'm going to say nothing of great interest as we are in the tunnel. So nothing that would that you'll miss in the story. So that's why I'm quite surprised that Chiswick is that expensive anyway, because the Hammersmith flyover is a very, very busy road that is just right next to them, really. So that's not very nice. I lived in Hammersmith myself many moons ago, not for very long, but yeah. Anyway, we are out. So I think the signal did survive, so we're all good. So yes, so Harold Jones was freed. He started a new life with a new name in Fulham, so not far from here, and then in Hammersmith. He literally lived a couple of streets away from two of the victims. And they used modern profilers, and they used nowadays they use geoprofiling for murders, and he's right in the zone. And he also had some kind of an oral obsession. As a teenager, some of his girlfriend was asking them to spat in her mouth and stuff. And of course, some of the teeth were missing. So he kept teeth as a little trophy, or souvenir. So even in terms of the way of killing, there are some similarities. And in terms of the geolocation, he's literally spot on. He started a family here. His daughter is still alive. She's been interviewed as well by the BBC. She had no idea that her dad was a killer at the first place. So she did know that he was using a fake name, because through the time of the investigation here in the 60s, he actually changed his name again. So he probably, and he worked by that industrial thing where the bodies were kept. So he's a very, very good suspect indeed. And, we know he's a psychopath. It's very rare that such psychopath would somehow change, especially with no desire to change, as he had said when he was in prison. So yeah, Harold Jones, quite a convincing case, if you ask me. I don't know what happened with the inquiries, because after the documentary, I think that was 2019 or something, the police did agree to reopen the case, but I don't think there's been any development since. It'll be hard to, you can still find some evidence years and years later, but really it's more likely to be circumstantial, at this stage. And there's already quite a bit of circumstantial evidence, if you ask me. Anyway, this is Hammersmith. So this is the main street. It goes down towards Hammersmith station. I lived here myself about 16 years ago now. Actually, I lived about 200 yards down from Harold Jones. Obviously, that was 60 years later. But I did the route earlier today because I wanted to see how long it would take him to walk to his victims. And then I walked in front of my home. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I say my home. I didn't stay very long. I stayed maybe 4 months. That was the smallest room I ever lived in. I don't want to exaggerate, but I think it probably was maximum 6 square meters. There was a small bed, and that was it really. A small bed on some kind of little furniture where I can put my stuff. That was cheap though. That was 350 for a single room at the time. That was already very cheap. But yeah, one of my flatmates was a bit of a case, so we had to move anyway. Right, let me try to cross over and I'll tell you about one more murder. There was a case here, 1956. An Irishman that lived here in a lodging house, you know, a flat share. The landlady, Margaret, was not very security concerned, let's say, and my bicycle is here. What have they done? They flipped it around. They flipped it. I parked it the other side. Sorry, 1 second. They've literally managed to flip it completely around. I hate that. When you leave your bicycle, you come back, it's in a completely different position. Anyway, that annoys me because, I mean, I've got a broken foot, a broken toe, I think. I didn't go to hospital, but it's because I kicked my own bicycle because they broke something because they moved it when it was parked. So I've been struggling with a painful toe for weeks because of people that do that. Anyway, let's go back to our murder. So the guy was an Irish unskilled labourer. He didn't have much money, but his only pleasures in life really were to bet on the horse races, have a pint of Guinness every so often, but he just didn't have much to spend. He lived right here behind the trees. I'll show you. It's number 22. And one evening, one of his colleagues or friends came back in the home. I think it's this one here, the white one, and they had a bit of a winning with the dog race. So they were like, "Hey, Kerry." His name was not Kerry, but he was from Kerry in Ireland. So that's the building here, and they heard no reply. So the guy was like, okay, he pushed the door to go and see his friend. And as he pushed the door, he found his friend's body. He was on his bed in a very white, cold state. So he had been murdered. Now, the landlady was so open, you know, she left the door open all the time. She had absolutely no checks on her lodgers, nothing. So they knew that John had the tendency to not use the banks. He liked to keep his cash. He did not really trust any banks actually. So people would often spot him with a lot of cash in his wallet, hundreds sometimes. So even people that he would have met at the pub, they would know that John would carry cash. And anyone could have got in. The landlady, Margaret, she used to leave the door open. So if his own door was not closed, anyone could have got in. Let's keep moving because I don't want to stay in front of their places for too long. Let me show you a blue plaque. I'll tell you in a moment. this is an amazing couple, the blue plaque. I'll tell you in a moment, as soon as we've finished with John O'Shea, fantastic story as well. So John, he had a lot of cash. We don't know how much, but that cash was stolen. So the murder was probably for financial gain. It looks like there are some homelesses living under this bridge here. Their little living room. It's great that the local residents don't complain, and hopefully they're quite popular with the local community as well. Anyway, so the police did everything they could, but they had no clues. No one was caught for the murder. They concluded that he was murdered by persons or person unknown for financial gain, and that was it for many years. Then in '59, so about 3 years later, there's a chap called Richard Hodson that was also an Irishman. He went to the press, he went to a journalist, and he confessed that he had killed John O'Shea of Hammersmith 3 years earlier for money. So of course the guy went to the police, and the police arrested Hodson. And when he was arrested, he was a little bit intoxicated, so he was like, yeah, I did. And when he sobered down, he said no. He said he was really high on alcohol, on marijuana, on other stuff. And he said he had been a bit depressed, and he heard about the murder at the pub, and he decided to accuse himself to be hanged, which, if true, is very, very sad. But everything was coherent between his confession and what they knew about the case. Everything was completely coherent. So he was tried. Hi, Kevin. And the jury was asked, do you think he's guilty? Or is it just a time waster? Eventually the jury concluded that he was a time waster, that he did not commit the act, and he was acquitted. So the case of John O'Shea is still unsolved today. Now, let me explain the blue plaque. It's an amazing story. It's Helen and William Craft that lived there for, I think they stayed 18 years in Hammersmith. Some of you might have heard of the couple. They famously escaped slavery in 1848 in Georgia. So Helen was a mixed-race girl. She was the daughter of an enslaved lady that had been impregnated by her enslaver. She had a very sad life, of course, so she was enslaved, but she had witnessed her sister being gifted to a different family. She married William, that was an enslaved black man, but they did not want to have kids because, of course, they did not want to bring any kids in that horrible slavery system, and they didn't want their kids to be taken away or anything, and they planned an escape. They were such con artists in a way, but bold and very, no one would believe that it worked, but it did. So basically William told Helen that she should dress up as a man, a white man. She was mixed race, so it worked. So she dressed up as a master, a man, and William, so the husband, pretended to be his servant, or his slave. So they escaped Georgia. Bear in mind, they've taken a lot of trains, ferries. There were a lot of checkpoints, and they didn't know how to write. But they had planned that. Very, very smart. Helen had some kind of a sleeve. Let me show you. I've got a photo of Helen as the white master. So she put her arm in a sleeve. So she claimed that because of that disability, she couldn't write. So whenever she had to sign something at the checkpoint, she would ask people to do it for her. It worked most of the time. She did get into a few arguments with some people that refused originally because, even on the illustration, she doesn't look much like a man to me. But that worked. They managed to go all the way towards Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was full of abolitionists. So they were free. So that's 1848. And they started to live their life in Philadelphia as a free couple. But then there was an act of parliament that stated that of parliament, I don't know, an act, a political act that stated that the enslaved people that had escaped could be reached and recaptured. So the hold on, I've lost the chat. Bear with me. No, what did I do? Oh crap! Hold on, I've lost the chat. No, what happened? Okay, well, it's okay. It's the end of the tour anyway. It might come back. That's the little bug that happened to me a year ago. It's happening again. So yeah, there were some people that were sent over to fetch them in Philadelphia. So they escaped. They moved to London. So they lived here in Hammersmith. They had 5 children, and they kept their life with the abolitionist movement, being activist. Eventually, though, when enslaved people were completely freed in America as well, they went back. They went to Boston, where they suffered a bit of abuse and racism, but they continued with their cause. So amazing escape, amazing couple, really, and a very interesting story. Now let me try to see what I can do to. It's funny because I can't see anything, but it's when I removed the photo. Oh, hold on. No. Well, it's okay. I'm sure you, hopefully you can still hear me and everything. I can't see the chat. You know what? It might actually be a good thing because, you know, when I had this issue with the security at Eton, I had to finish the tour very quickly, so I couldn't say bye to you, and not as much bye as I usually do. So you didn't get a chance to tell me, oh, great tour in the chat. So a lot of you left me a comment to say, oh, great tour, thank you, which is amazing. If you could do that every time, that's fantastic, because you know, YouTube algorithms, they work with engagement. Well, the more comments you leave, the more people might see my lives and my replays. So if you cannot say bye-bye in the chat, maybe you'll say bye in the comments, and then I'll get a lot of comments. So that's probably a good thing. Anyway, I'm just gonna go all the way up to the junction here, because I wanna show you where Harold Jones used to live, and where I used to live. I used to live on AD Road, so that's the one there to the right, and Harold was on that one. I just wish, oh, I should have showed you that photo. We didn't even need to see that illustration. It's always when I remove an illustration that the little bug happens. I don't know how I've, let me see, no, there's nothing I can do. I don't even know why. Why would I want to remove the chat? Anyway, so this is, I believe, AD Road. I used to live, excuse my finger, but I used to live there in the basement. That was the tiny little room. And the victim, so that's the lady, Bridget O'Hara. She lived at the end of that street on the right. When Harold, he had an address. Well, he had a couple of locations in which he lived in Hammersmith, but he lived on that street here. The streets has been renumbered, so I'm not going to show you the exact one because I don't want to show you the wrong one. You don't want to be told you live in a murder location or in a serial killer's address when you don't. So I don't want to show you, but he used to live on this street. So very, very close to 2 of his victims. So I think he's a very good candidate indeed. Anyway, that's going to be the end of the tour. Let me try to see if I can finish the tour. I'm not even able to finish the tour because, hold on, maybe if I try to put, if I put a filter and I remove it, maybe, no, because, I can write in the chat, but that's not what I want, no. Anyway, thank you very much for coming today, guys. It's always a pleasure to have you along. If any of you dropped me a little tip on Buy Me a Coffee or on PayPal, it's very, very much appreciated. It's thanks to your generosity. I'd like to show you my face again, but I can't. Well, I could do like this. Bye. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Wednesday we're heading to Brixton, so that's quite cool as well. We've not been there for at least 2.5 years now. So Wednesday night, Brixton, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. And let me try to close it. Right. That might take a while. Oh, God. I don't understand why. Feel free to go. You don't have to wait and see me struggle. I don't know what I can do.
Are you a blogger?
I am indeed, yeah. Well, I'm on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, just have a little bug at the moment.
Can you tell me your channel?
Nathalie Kerio. Nathalie.
Nath.
Thalie.
Okay.
Kerio. Kerrio. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to turn my phone off. There's no other solution here. Let me see. It's funny because I had this bug like when I was in Skegness, so in May. Thank you. And it didn't happen ever since, so I thought it was fixed. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to turn my phone off. It seems to be the only option because I can't do anything else. Just so weird. Hold on, what if I do this? No. Why? It's silly. Why would I not want the ability to say to close everything?